What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Draft Hub. And today we are rolling along with our 2025-26 record predictions for each conference in college football. Now, today, I'm super excited about this one. We are going to the ACC. This is a very interesting conference because, especially last year, there were some breakout teams. This year, I think there's legitimately 6 teams, maybe even 7, that could make an appearance in the conference championship game. One, I'm sure we all are thinking the same thing. There's probably one shoe-in, but there's a lot of other teams that are going to be vying for that number 2 spot, in my opinion, and it's going to be interesting to get through. But before we get into this video, if you guys enjoy videos like this, please leave a like and please subscribe to the channel. The growth of this channel in the off season of football season really has been unbelievable. I started this channel at the end of April, beginning of May, and we're almost at 300 subscribers already. That is unbelievable. You guys have just unbelievable support so far. I can't thank you guys enough. So if you do enjoy this video today, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It will help me out greatly, excuse me. And not only that, I'll be super grateful, but if you enjoy other college football content, NFL draft content, NFL content, this is the place to be. So without further delay, let's get into the ACC record prediction. In the basement of the ACC, I have the Stanford Cardinal. Now, the Stanford itself is just in a bit of a mess at this point. There's not really too much to say about this. General manager, I guess you can call him. I don't know off the top of my head the correct term for Andrew Luck. He is looking for a long-term head coach. They are not going to get that in Frank Reich. He is the interim head coach taking over Stanford for this season. Really, it boils down to the fact that this team just isn't really talented. The Stanford Cardinal of old is long gone, of all these fantastic players, especially through the transfer portal era as well. Like, you got great players that were here, like Emmett Mosley V, David Bailey. Those guys are gone. Emmett Mosley transferred to Texas. David Bailey transferred to Texas Tech. Those are 2 of the best players on Stanford. Sam Roush is a really good player. I think he's going to develop into one of the best tight ends in the ACC. You know, it's not only just the lack of talent. The schedule is particularly brutal, in my opinion, for Stanford this year. They face teams like BYU, SMU, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, Notre Dame. There's really only 2 games that I'm circling that I feel like Stanford have a good chance to win. That would be week 1 against Hawaii, and then you have, I believe that's week 11 or week 12 against Cal. Those are really the only 2 games on the schedule that I think Stanford truly have a chance, unfortunately. There's not really much to say about this. This is a tough team on defense. You know, they were 17th in the ACC in pass efficiency on the defensive side last year. They gave up 31 passing touchdowns on the defensive side. They returned 6 starters. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I guess it's good for the experience. But on the flip side, if most of your defensive players are coming back that were on a really bad defense, is it good for them to come back? So a lot of questions have to be answered long-term for the Stanford Cardinal team. Frank Reich is just a name at the end of his coaching career, in my opinion. I'm not knocking Frank Reich. I think he is a good coach. He was a proven winner for the most part in the NFL. I think he will do a good bit of good deed at Stanford for however long he's going to be here, but he is not the long-term answer. So long-term outlook of this program is looking pretty bleak right now, but that's really all I have to say. I do have them at a record prediction, unfortunately, of 1-11. I do think they could go 2-10, maybe get a shock win in there at 3-9 with Frank Reich's leadership. But other than that, I don't think it's anything other than the basement for the Stanford Cardinal. At number 16, I have the Cal Golden Bears here. Now, to the right, we have a logo. I don't know if this is fan art, if this is a new logo, or this is just an alternate logo. Before people start commenting, oh, you know, how do you know anything about these college teams? You don't even know the correct logo. I've said it in probably every other. We're closing in on the finale of this series. This is the 3rd to last video. I only have the Big Ten and the SEC left to do for the FBS, and I've said it in every single video. I'll say it again. I choose logos that I like. This is an awesome fucking logo. Excuse my language. But It really is. It truly is a fantastic logo. Look at that. That is so much better than the regular Cal logo. Whether this is fan art, it's an alternate, it's not their primary, I don't care. Whatever the logo is, I like it, I'm going to use it. This is an awesome logo. I hope that this is their new primary. But yeah, I have Cal at a record prediction of 3-9. It's just, it boils down to kind of the same thing on a lesser degree than Stanford, where you have the two best offensive players in Jaden Ott, Fernando Mendoza, who have transferred. That's a monumental amount of production, especially since I think Fernando Mendoza is a top 5 quarterback talent in the 2026 NFL draft. I think he's got it all. I think he's really going to show out at Indiana. He's going to make them an absolute powerhouse again this year. Jaden Ott is another player that is super slept on throughout his collegiate career. I think he's really going to show out at Oklahoma. But on the offensive side, they lose a ton of production. On the defensive side, which was not the problem for the Golden Bears last year, they allowed teams to have 4.99 yards per snap and 22.3 points per game. That is unbelievable numbers considering the lack of depth on the defensive side. Noel Williams is in the NFL. Teddy Buchanan is in the NFL. That is an unbelievable amount of production between the two of them. Teddy Buchanan was a do-it-all linebacker. Noel Williams, 7 interceptions last year. He was unbelievable. I don't think that they have the chops. They don't have the talent. They don't have the depth to keep up with these transfers. Now, on the offensive side, they brought in a ton of transfers. The defensive side, they brought in a ton of transfers as well. My thing is, I don't know how long it's going to take for these transfers to gel. You're getting a lot of inexperience on this team in terms of transfers. And there's a good bit of, I think they're only returning 3 starters on the defense. So you got 7 to 8 spots where transfer players are going to fight for snaps. Same thing really on the offensive side. They also gave up 50 sacks last year. The offensive line is completely rebuilt through the transfer portal. That to me doesn't really, speak volumes either. That's going to be a huge problem for Devin Brown, assuming that he does win the starting spot, the Ohio State transfer. There's just a lot of question marks. This is also not, again, it's not crazy difficult, but it's not an easy schedule. I would say Cal, if all things go right and Justin Wilcox gets the most out of his boys, they could probably push for a bowl game, maybe 5-7, somehow shock a lot of people and go 6-6. Oregon State, Minnesota is a sleeper team, Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, SMU. These are all really, really tough games on that schedule for them. I think this is a transitional year for them. Cal is a team that usually, produces very, very good NFL talent. They're usually relatively okay in terms of record and in terms of overall season production. I think this is a big transitional year for them. So I think that they have talent in certain places that will be good long term. I just think this is a big growing pains type of year for Justin Wilcox and his boys. I got Wake Forest at 15 here. The Wake Forest Demon Deacons at 3-9. Jake Dickert taking over the reins of this team. So I like the potential NFL talent that this team has. I think Damon Claiborne is a fantastic overall running back. I think he is going to easily run away as the most valuable offensive player for this team. Again, it's just huge question marks around. There's new coaches, new play callers, everything is new, essentially. A ton of transfers have to come in. This defense gave up 32.5 points per game last year. They're bringing back a decent amount. They're also bringing in a couple players that are exciting, but it's such a work in progress. On the offensive side, it's, again, a work in progress. There's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of transfers. I do like the overall, like I said, the NFL caliber of a lot of these players on the offensive and defensive side, of course, led by Damon Claiborne. But, this is a team that's interesting because if they play down, they're going to be super low. Like, the offense isn't terribly inspiring. I feel like if they sputter on the offensive side, if teams stack 8 in the box against Claiborne, I think it's going to be a real problem for Wake Forest to pass the ball overall. Defensively, I think it's going to be better. It's kind of tough to be worse than almost 33 points per game. But I think it will be a little bit better. The schedule is favorable. Now, this is where maybe the 3-9 is more of a floor for this team, because if we run through the schedule, you have Kennesaw State, Western Carolina, and NC State as their first three games of the season. Now, right there, they could very well start 3-0. And then you have winnable games against Virginia Tech. I think Oregon State is a team that's relatively winnable. You have Virginia, Delaware. These are they could potentially be 6-6 if all goes well, or maybe even 7-5. I just think, again, similar to Cal, I think this is going to be a little bit of a transitional year. This is an entirely new staff, a lot of young transfers coming in important skill positions. Unfortunately, I think the Demon Deacons, I believe they went 3-9 last year. I feel like they do go 3-9. They went 3-9 or 4-8 last year. I'm pretty sure. I think that it's a repeat, and then we start to see some progress next year under a coaching staff that gets a year under its belt, a defensive coordinator that brings in some recruits that fit his defense a little bit better. Same with the offensive side. I think Jake Dickert is a good coach. I think he had a lot of success at Washington State. I think he's going to bring that over to the ACC eventually, but it's going to take a little bit of time, and I think this year is a transitional year for them. At 14, I have Boston College with a 4-8 record here. Bill O'Brien and his defense. I don't think the defense. Let's just jump right into it. I don't think the defense is really going to be the problem. They're getting back Amari Jackson, which I think is a huge get for them. Carter Davis is also a stud in the secondary. I think the question marks on the defensive side lie on the defensive line. It is unbelievable difficult to replace the production of Donovan Ezriaku. 16.5 sacks last year. I believe he was the ACC Defensive Player of the Year. Could be wrong on that. I'm pretty sure he did win that. But on the offensive side, I feel like there's a lot of question marks, especially throwing the ball. It's going to be tough. Grayson James came in. They took over the starting spot in November. He played pretty well. Alabama transfer. Dylan Longren is in as well. This is going to be an interesting battle that they have here. Lewis Bond, I think, is a really, really capable playmaker. You have Turbo Richard as well, who's exciting. You have Reed Harris. They have weapons. Don't get me wrong. I just think that it's all going to hinder on the play of the quarterback. And I know that's a blanket statement, especially when it comes to, of course, on the offensive side, of course, you need a quarterback to play well to have a good offense. Not all the time. You could rely on a good offensive line and a good running back. But I feel like with Boston College here, they're a little bit of an enigma in terms of the offensive side this year. I don't really know what you're going to get. Unproven backs, but really, really exciting backs for the most part. The schedule is, again, I like to run through the schedule as much as I can with a lot of these teams just to kind of give you a glimpse of where my head is at. 4-8. Is really a basement. It's kind of a worst case scenario. I feel like this team could potentially go 7-5, 8-4 if Bill O'Brien gets the most out of these boys. You got winnable games. Fordham. I feel like Michigan State is a relatively winnable game. Stanford, Cal, UConn is a tough team. Don't get me wrong. Syracuse. These are all games that I think they could win. I think they could go bowling when it's all said and done. They could be 6-6, 7-5. I do feel like they are going to have some hiccups. Michigan State, while it's a winnable game, is a tough game. UConn, again, is a tough game. And then that leaves you with basically 4 wins on the schedule. And those aren't guaranteed either. Syracuse is another team that, isn't no picnic. So I feel like the schedule combined with the uncertainty at the quarterback position, with the uncertainty with the pass rush on the defensive side, I feel like Boston College is going to be really good against the pass. But I feel like they're going to struggle in run defense, and they're going to struggle getting to the quarterback. And that's really, listen, we've seen it even in the NFL where a lack of pass rush could really just neutralize even the best secondary. Look at the Jets 2 years ago. The Jets had one of the best secondaries in football and wound up, 7-10? Because the secondary collapsed at the end of the year because they're on the field. Well, I mean, the offense was terrible. And the pass rush wasn't able to generate any pressure whatsoever. So these boys are fighting for their life out there. And I feel like that's, a quick synopsis of what Boston College potentially could be this year. Now, this might come as a shock, especially after last year with Kyle McCord, but I have Syracuse at 13 at 4-8. Fran Brown was fantastic in his first year. Steve Angeli is a huge transfer quarterback, similar to what Kyle McCord was last year. I don't think Steve Angeli is as good as Kyle McCord, but Jonte Cook is a nice find for them as well. Now, the reason, really, there's just two reasons for this. I think Syracuse, I think Fran Brown is a good head coach. I think the schedule is brutal, and Syracuse didn't do enough for me to improve the front seven against the run. They gave up 5.3 rush yards per rush last year, one of the worst in the ACC. And let's just run through this schedule real quick. These are the only two reasons why I have this. I could see them going 5-7 maybe. It's a tough start to the year. You have Tennessee, you have UConn. Those are two games that, while I could see them being winnable, especially against UConn, they're tough. UConn is actually a very solid program. Colgate is most likely a win. Clemson, Duke, those are super tough games. SMU, again, at SMU, really tough. Pitt is potentially a winnable game. At Georgia Tech, at North Carolina, at Miami. I'm sorry, versus North Carolina, versus Miami, versus Notre Dame, and then Boston College. I mean, that is a gauntlet. They probably have the toughest schedule in the ACC. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. And I think that's truly where it is. I think they lost a ton in terms of production. Let's see, the returning production is 90th in the FBS for them. And the transfer rank was 68th. So really, they didn't replace a whole lot in terms of getting better from returning production. So again, you got Steve Angeli, you got Jonte Cook. They have a couple really nice players on the defensive side. I just think the schedule is just so unbelievably brutal. It's got to be one of the toughest schedules in college football. I really think so. You have one maybe guaranteed win on this schedule, and that's against that's against Colgate. I feel like every other game, this team could potentially go 1-11. Potentially. And that is not indicative of this roster. But I'm just preparing people for how brutal this schedule actually is. There's a potential this team does not do very well. At 12, I have the Virginia Cavaliers at 5-7. This was Tony Elliott's best season last year. He went 5-7. I like what this team did in the transfer portal. I like getting Chandler Morris, North Texas legend Chandler Morris there. I like him to shore up the quarterback position. He averaged about 308 passing yards a game last year, so he is someone that could definitely sling it. They lost a lot. That's the problem with me. They lost Malachi Fields, which was easily their best overall wide receiver. That's a huge loss for them. Monroe Mills is a player who unfortunately had a season-ending injury in spring camp, in spring practice, I believe. On the defensive side, they also lost Jonas Sanker, who was one of the best safeties in the ACC. They also only generated 19 sacks last year and didn't really do a whole lot to get better up front. So that's going to be a daunting task again this year. Really, the reason why I have them winning 5 games and potentially even going 6-6 and somehow making a bowl game, their schedule is pretty easy for the most part. You got Coastal Carolina, which will, that could be a win. NC State, again, could be a win. William and Mary is probably a win. Stanford. Washington State could be a win. Cal, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech. Those are games that I have circled that are potential wins. And then, of course, you have Florida State, Louisville, North Carolina, Duke. Relatively speaking, this is a pretty good schedule for them. Not only that, they also had the 26th ranked transfer class in the FBS. So they could get a ton of production from their transfers on the defensive side, on the offensive side. So it just remains to be seen. But I do think that the Cavaliers, even though they did lose a ton of talent, they did do a good job through the transfer portal to replace a lot of that talent, and they have a relatively favorable schedule. So this could even be a flipped schedule. This could be a flipped record. They could go 7-5. I think 5-7 is a relatively happy medium for this Cavaliers team. At number 11, I have Virginia Tech at 5-7. Brent Pry's team. I feel like they're getting a big boost in Kyron Drones coming back fully healthy. Caleb Woodson is a player that I love on the defensive side, and transfer Ben Bell is a player that I like a lot. That could help this pass rush quite a bit. And you know what's funny about this team is last year this defense only gave up 22.8 points per game. They went 7-6 overall. They went bowling, but they gave up so many big plays and they could not get off the field on third down. I think it's hilarious how they played like some of the best bend not break defense you've ever seen, because how do you give up 20 less than 23 points per game but you give up a ton of big plays and you can't get off the field on third down? So I'd love to see them improve in that area. This schedule again, I mean, I keep going back to it because overall that's how you get a record prediction, is you go by a schedule, people. So I'm going to keep bringing that up, especially for these big programs. You have a very topsy-turvy schedule here. You got teams like South Carolina, you got teams like Wofford. So let's take a look at the schedule here. We're going to go through it. Teams that I think are very tough to play against on the schedule, you got South Carolina, you have Georgia Tech, Louisville, Florida State, Miami. Those are tough teams. And then you got, in between games against Vanderbilt, Old Dominion, against your rival Virginia. It's tough. And then you got, of course, a winnable game in Wofford. NC State is another in between game. So this is a tough schedule for this team. I think Drones is one of the more exciting quarterbacks when fully healthy in the ACC. He showed that a couple years ago as an absolute stud, as a super young quarterback. I mean, he was, when I was doing my big board last year for the NFL draft, when it was, before the injury and everything, I was super high on Kyron Drones. I thought he was a super intelligent quarterback that brought a ton of athleticism. So I'd love to see him get back to that. And if he can get back to the play of a couple years ago, then a couple of those tough games might be winnable. So until we do see that, until we see the old Kyron Drones, I think 5-7 is more than favorable for the Hokies. NC State, I have breaking the top 10 with a record of 5-7. Now, a tale of two halves of a schedule for NC State. We'll go through it at the end, but it starts off very favorable, and then it just gets really, really bad, really, really fast. CJ Bailey is a super exciting quarterback prospect for them, threw about 2,500 yards last year, 14 touchdowns. He should be one of the better signal callers in the ACC with a year of experience under his belt. Justin Jolly is a tight end that I like quite a bit. I've liked him for a couple years now. Been waiting for him to come out, but waiting for him not to. But I think he's going to be a big play threat for them. 29.7 points per game last year. Hopefully, with a new a new defensive coordinator in, they can get a little bit better on that end. The pass rush was really bad. Temple transfer, Trot Thomas comes in. Hopefully, he could bolster the pass rush. I think he only had 3.5 sacks last year, so that remains to be seen. But they only had 16 sacks last year, which was dead last in the ACC. This is a team that I think if CJ Bailey kind of starts to develop into the player that we think that he can become, then I think good quarterback play takes this team to probably 7-5, maybe even 8-4. But we're going to run through the schedule now. Hollywood Smothers also being here is huge. Not only that, he has one of the greatest names in college football. I feel like I say that once every video. If you go back, I always say, I love this guy's name. He's got a great name. So the first 6 weeks of the season are relatively favorable. East Carolina, which is no slouch, by the way. Virginia, Wake Forest, Duke, Virginia Tech, and Campbell. And then the last 6 weeks of the season is just an absolute gauntlet. Notre Dame, Pitt, Georgia Tech, Miami, Florida State, North Carolina. It's going to be tough. Again, a lot of fans of these teams don't want to see these record predictions because NC State, over the last 10 years has been one of the better programs in the ACC, I feel like. But, it's tough. I could see a win against Pitt. I could see a win against North Carolina. East Carolina is a tough team. Virginia is in between. Wake Forest, they'll probably get a win. Duke is tough. Virginia Tech is in between. There's not a lot of. I've seen a good buddy of mine, one of my best friends, especially in this YouTube community, J-Wack Gridiron, had them at 2-10. I don't think it's going to be that bad for them, but I think there are some winnable games on the schedule. But I don't think they're going to go bowling. I really don't. Unless CJ Bailey really develops into an absolute stud. I think there's one more year of development for CJ Bailey before we can consider him one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC. But no sack production combined with a tough schedule, I don't think it's going to bode well for the Wolfpack. At 9, I have the Pitt Panthers. Now, they started off like gangbusters last year. It's 7-0 last year. Then it all kind of, fell apart for them for the most part. They had injuries to Eli Holstein. They had injuries to Desmond Reed. Played a major role at the end of the season. I have Pitt at 6-6 here because, again, this is another team that has a super difficult schedule and a super easy schedule at the same time. Because the non-conference games that they've lined up, I think, are absolute layups, and then they have a brutal conference schedule. But the defense is going to be a unit that I think is going to be pretty good. I mean, last year they only gave up 5.2 yards per snap. They're returning Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles are probably one of the best linebacker duos in college football. Probably the best linebacker duo in the ACC, in my opinion. Jimmy Scott, 12.5 tackles for a loss last year. Sean Fitzsimmons, Nick James coming back for the interior. They do have to replace Donovan McMillan, unfortunately, but I think this defense is going to be super solid. The offense, too, like I said, Desmond Reed, Kenny Johnson, I think he's going to be a breakout, had about 400 receiving yards last year. Eli Holstein is one of the more exciting younger quarterbacks in the ACC. It's just a pretty tough schedule overall. If we look at the schedule here, the tough teams, Louisville, Florida State, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, Miami, and then you have a couple teams that are middling there, Boston College, West Virginia. But then you have I'm going to butcher this name because I just have a mental block with saying this. Dunst. I don't know how to say that team. I don't know how to say it, but they're an FCS school. That's all I know. And then you have Stanford on the schedule as well. Tough schedule for this team. I think they have a ton of playmakers on the offensive side. I think they are returning a ton of playmakers on the defensive side. I just think that they're playing a lot of teams that are just way more talented than them, unfortunately. But I do think Eli Holstein is one of the most exciting quarterbacks in the ACC. I would love to see another, because he during that 7-0 stretch at the beginning of the year, he took the college football world by storm. I mean, there were talks of Eli Holstein being a Heisman candidate last year. And then, of course, the injuries started to set in. So if he can continue to develop, maybe by next year, he could be a dark horse for the Heisman Trophy if he could stay healthy. But I think this is a difficult year for the Pitt Panthers. I think their conference schedule is particularly brutal. And I think 6-6 is, and they're going to go bowling at 6-6. So I think that's more than fair with the schedule that they do have. At number 8, I have the Florida State Seminoles, with the first team in the ACC with a winning record at 8-4. Yeah, it's crazy that the 8th place team is 8-4. I think this conference is just so divided. It is so top heavy, in my opinion. But Mike Norvell had one of the craziest dips in production, probably in college football history. In 2023, they went 13-1. And then last year they went 2-10. Now, what's hilarious is I went with a little bit more of a conservative record prediction because I think the video is still on my old channel. If I remember and people ask about it, I will link it down below in the comments. If you do ask for it, I will send it to you or I will comment it back. I think I had them going like 11-1 or like 12-0, something crazy like that. Because why wouldn't I? Last year on paper, especially on the defensive side, they had a great squad. I didn't know that it would fall apart and they would only average 15.4 points per game. I mean, that's unbelievable. But they brought in Gus Malzahn to be their new play caller, which I think is huge. They brought in Thomas Castellanos, which I think is huge because quarterback play was really, really bad. Squirrel White is an exciting wide receiver that they brought in from Tennessee. Deuce Robinson is another transfer wide receiver that I like quite a bit. On the defensive side, they're always going to be really good on the defensive side. You got Darrell Jackson Jr., James Williams, Omar Graham, Jeremiah Wilson. They're going to be good on the defensive side. And the schedule is relatively favorable, which I like quite a bit. It starts off kind of rough against Alabama, but then you have a really nice 3-game stretch against East, Texas A&M, Kent State, and Virginia. Then you got to play Miami. But then you have another 3 winnable games right after that in Pitt, Stanford, and Wake Forest. Then they play Clemson. Then you got Virginia Tech and NC State. And then they play Florida. So, relatively speaking, I think that's a very favorable schedule for Mike Norvell and this team. I think they got I'm not going to say they got lucky in conference play because those are all difficult games. Non-conference play is besides for Alabama is pretty much a joke. I feel like East Texas A&M and Kent State. Jesus, give me a break there. But yeah, I do think this team is exciting. They brought in a lot of good transfers. I think they're going to be back. I don't think that they're going to be back in full swing to the Florida State that we're used to seeing, but they're not going to be 2-10 and they're not going to be 5-7. They're going to be good. They're going to have a winning record, and Mike Norvell is going to be able to start building this team up from being the laughingstock of the ACC like they were last year to a powerhouse yet again. At number 7, I have North Carolina with new head coach Bill Belichick. That is a sentence that in my 28 years of life, I don't think I was ever going to be able to say. That is kind of crazy in my opinion. But new head coach Bill Belichick, yes, has a I don't want to say daunting. It's not a daunting task because his name just carries so much weight that I feel like over the course of time, he's going to get a ton of good transfers in. And he kind of did. I mean, quarterback Gio Lopez right away is a huge get for them. They had the 8th ranked transfer portal class in the country. Gio Lopez is a huge reason for that. Thaddeus Dixon is a huge reason for that as well. Kobe Paysour is returning, and he's going to be good again. I think he had almost 500 receiving yards last year. There's a lot of question marks with this team. They bring back 3 offensive line starters, which is nice. Gio Lopez is going to be huge for them. The running back situation is tough. A wide receiver 2 and 3. The defense, outside of a couple key players, is a question mark. But you know that Bill Belichick is going to get the absolute most. He's going to squeeze the most juice out of these kids as he possibly can. And I think that his experience and especially being more of a defensive-minded coach, I think despite the fact that there's a lot of question marks on the defensive side, I think he's going to do really well, and I think he's going to actually put together a very, very solid unit. I think it's going to be some growing pains. Don't get me wrong. But I think overall, he's going to put together a good squad. This is a relatively favorable schedule. It starts kind of tough against TCU, but it is at home. Then you have 3 non-conference games that I think they should be dominated. Charlotte, Richmond, and UCF. Then you have Clemson, Cal, and Virginia are winnable games. So is Syracuse and Stanford. And you have Wake Forest and Duke and NC State. So really the only 4 losses I kind of see, or at least 3 guaranteed losses in my opinion. Probably TCU, Clemson, and Duke. And then probably sprinkle in a loss against maybe a Syracuse or an NC State. I think this is going to be a really successful first year for Bill Belichick. And like I said, he's got good defensive players, just a lot of question marks. Marcus Allen, Thaddeus Dixon, Andrew Simpson. They got good defensive players. Don't get me wrong. So I think Bill Belichick is going to make the most out of his first year and really watch out after that because I feel like the transfer classes he's going to be able to bring in, the recruiting classes he's going to be able to bring in, I think North Carolina is going to be an absolute powerhouse in the ACC as soon as next year. At number 6, and maybe the biggest shock of this video, I have SMU at 8-4. Now, Rhett Lashley had a fantastic first year in the ACC. They went 11-3 overall, made it to the college football playoff, and they did lose. Significant personnel turnover, and a significantly tougher schedule is the reason I have them at 8-4. I think they have incredible talent on both sides of the ball. Kevin Jennings was a revelation last year after taking over for Preston Stone. He was phenomenal. I think he's going to be phenomenal again this year. RJ Maryland is a player that I like quite a bit, who was good last year, who's going to be good again this year. They only bring back 2 starters on the defensive side. Last year, they were number 1 overall in the ACC in total defense. Ahmad Moses, Isaiah Wacobia, fantastic safeties. Probably the best safety duo, not only in the ACC, probably the best safety duo in the country, in my opinion. I think both of these guys are top 10 safeties in the 2026 NFL draft class if they come out. Again, this comes down to the overall schedule. SMU has a brutal schedule. I don't really know what you want me to tell you. I mean, look at this. We're looking at 2 of their first 3 games or against East Texas A&M. Wow, East Texas A&M has a brutal first couple of games of the year. They play East Texas A&M. They play Missouri State. The rest of it, Baylor, TCU, Clemson, Miami, Louisville. Those are tough teams. Now, they're sprinkled in with teams that they could beat. Like I said, East Texas A&M, Missouri State, Syracuse, Stanford, Wake Forest, Boston College, Cal. But I do feel like those are 5 losable games, and I do think they win one of those games. I think, quite frankly, I think that they'll win against either Baylor or TCU. I'm probably leaning more towards TCU than Baylor, but I think it's going to be rough for them. I truly think that they are going to kind of sort of come crashing back down to earth. And this is a tougher schedule, but in reality, it's not that tough of a schedule. They do have 5 really tough games on there, but I feel like we've seen tougher schedules. I mean, Syracuse's schedule is brutal, but I think Kevin Jennings is going to have a Heisman type of year this year. I really do think he's a beast like that. I just think overall the team has significant personnel turnover. It's going to be difficult for them to, replicate what they did last year, especially on the defensive side. And I think teams are going to exploit that. So, tell me I don't know anything. Whatever. A prediction is a prediction. We'll see. I don't know. But I think SMU goes 8-4. At number 5, I have the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets here at 9-3. I feel like this is the most slept-on team in the ACC. Brent Key is bringing back some phenomenal players, especially on the offensive side. You have a powerhouse duo in the backfield in Haynes King and Jamal Haynes. Eric Rivers comes in to be an unbelievable transfer wide receiver. They did lose Eric Singleton, which was huge, but they replaced him with another Eric that is very, very good. Maybe not as good as Eric Singleton, but very, very good in his own right. Eric Rivers last year for FIU, I believe almost 1,200 receiving yards. He was their offense. So I think he's going to slot in seamlessly where Eric Singleton left off. On the defensive side, Kyle Effort is a player that I like quite a bit. I think he's going to be their defensive MVP. They do have question marks in the secondary and up front. It's going to be interesting to see how they get after the quarterback. But I think this offense is just absolutely unbelievable. And they do have a favorable schedule. You got games against Colorado, Gardner-Webb, Temple, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Boston College, Pitt. Those are all winnable games in my opinion. But then you have a couple tough games. Clemson, Duke, and Georgia are 3 games that I think that they are going to lose. But other than that, I think they win every other game. I think that they, just on technicalities and, however things are seeded, I think they do miss out on being a little bit higher in the ACC. But I think Georgia Tech is a phenomenal football team. I think they bring back an unbelievable amount of production. They bring back the 26th highest class in terms of returning production. The recruiting rank is 21st. I think they have a very, very bright future even after Haynes King and Jamal Haynes are gone. I think this team is going to be really good for the long term. At number 4, I have the Duke Blue Devils at 9-3. Yes, I think that they are going to be unbelievable this year. Manny Diaz in his first year was a revelation for Duke. And I think that he repeats success. And really one of the big reasons why is Darian Mensah. He was able to do all of that last year with Malik Murphy basically at the helm for most of the season. Darian Mensah was fantastic for Tulane last year. I think he's going to be even better for Duke. They also bring back Jaquez Moore, who was injured last year. I think it's a big boost to the backfield. 4 offensive line starters are back to form one of the most solidified units in the ACC. On the defensive side, they were tied for the conference lead in sacks last year with 43. They bring back 2 of my favorite defensive backs in the entire draft class, or the potential draft class. Chandler Rivers, I think, is unbelievable. Terry Moore is fantastic in his own right as well. This is just a super talented team, top and bottom. On the offensive side, they are good in a lot of key areas. The defensive side, they are great in a lot of key areas. And again, the schedule. I'll be honest with you, I kind of wanted to put Duke in the championship game. I know that sounds like absolutely crazy, but really, I didn't see too many almost guaranteed losses on this schedule. Versus Elon Musk. Versus Illinois, I do think that's a loss. Versus Tulane, NC State, Syracuse, Cal, Georgia Tech, which is most likely a loss. Clemson, which is most likely a loss. UConn, Virginia, North Carolina, Wake Forest. I think that those are 3, maybe 2 guaranteed losses. Maybe they shock someone somewhere or another. But this is a very, very good football team. A college once known for being only good at basketball. The Duke Blue Devils in football are here to stay for the long term. I think Manny Diaz is cooking up an absolutely fantastic roster. And they're good for the long haul, too. A 30th ranked recruiting class, in the nation. They're set up for the long haul. I think this is a very, very talented team that is going to produce a lot of NFL talent for years to come. At number 3, I have the Louisville Cardinals here, and I really wanted to put Jeff Brom's squad in the championship game. I did. I contemplated it. This was the toughest decision that I had to make, was the top 3. And unfortunately, you already know who the top 2 are at this point. Isaac Brown is fantastic. He's going to lead a dominant backfield for this squad. But I do have question marks in some pretty key areas for this team. One, on the offensive line. They're bringing in 4 new starters on that offensive line. I do think that's a pretty big question mark. Miller Moss, who is super exciting as well, transferred in from USC. He's a big play threat, but he's also inconsistent. We're going to need to see him be way more consistent if this team wants to challenge for the ACC title game. Also, the defense is not great. 5.6 yards per play last year. They allowed 19 completions of 40-plus yards last year. And this is also a Louisville team that has produced quite a bit of NFL talent in the secondary, so I'm very surprised by that number. But that has to be better. If they want a challenge for one of the top spots in the ACC, they need to clamp down on the huge plays. They need to get better against the run. And we kind of need to be solidified on the offensive line because Isaac Brown is a fantastic running back, one of the best in the ACC. But if that offensive line can't hold up, they're going to have problems. The schedule's looking okay. Really, really favorable on the first half for the most part. The second half, a little bit tougher. You have Eastern Kentucky, James Madison, Bowling Green as your top 3, as your first 3 games. That's probably a 3-0 start. Pitt, Virginia, those are winnable games. Miami is tough. That's where I think in week 6 or week 7, whatever it is, I think that game against Miami is going to determine who is second and going to the conference championship game at the end of the season. I truly do. I think that is going to be a deciding game early on in the season. Boston College, Virginia Tech, Cal, Clemson, SMU, Kentucky. Kentucky is a tough one. Clemson, of course, is a tough one. So is SMU. I think this team is talented. I think they have the potential to be an extremely potent offense as long as Miller Moss can get a little bit more consistent. Isaac Brown is as good as we know he can be. And the offensive line does hold up. And the defense does get a little bit better at stopping the big plays. And at number 2, maybe to no one's surprise, I have the Miami Hurricanes at 10-2. Mario Cristobal's team is littered with talent on the offensive side, on the defensive side. Francis Mauigoa is probably, I know he's the top right tackle prospect in the class, probably a top 5 overall offensive tackle in the class. They have Carson Beck, of course, who I don't know when people decided that Carson Beck was a bad quarterback. He wasn't great last year by his standards, but he was still a good quarterback. He was not the Carson Beck of 2 years ago. That is true, but he was still great. And I think that he is going to kind of slot in seamlessly for this Miami team that did lose a ton of talent overall through the draft and everything. You lose Cam Ward, Xavier Restrepo, Damian Martinez, all that kind of good stuff. But they have Mark Fletcher as well, who I think is going to be a really, really solid back for them. On the defensive side, you get a full healthy year, hopefully, of Ruben Bain Jr., who potentially is a top 5 pick in the 2026 NFL draft. He is an absolute beast on that side. 30.8 points per game in ACC play last year was not good for Cristobal's team, but he did revamp this team completely, especially the secondary, through the transfer portal. So I do expect some overall improvement from that area. Returning production is not great, but they did replace it with the 5th best transfer class in the country, 14th best recruiting class overall. And I'll be honest, this is a cookie cutter cupcake schedule for the most part for this Miami Hurricanes team, in my opinion. Notre Dame, that's obviously tough. Bethune-Cookman, UCF, Florida, Florida State, Louisville. Okay, maybe this isn't as cookie cutter as I thought it was overall at first. I saw Bethune-Cookman and I was like, oh yeah, the schedule is easy, but it's really not. But I do think they are better than most of these teams. So we'll go from top down to bottom again. Notre Dame, Bethune-Cookman, UCF, USF, Florida, Florida State, Louisville, Stanford, SMU, Syracuse, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Pitt. I do think the games against Notre Dame, there was another one in here that I thought, oh, yeah, I think between Florida, Florida State, Louisville, and SMU, I do think there is one loss in there for this Hurricanes team, probably against Florida or SMU, if I had to guess. It's going to be tough. I mean, it could be Louisville just as well, but I do think there is a second loss in there somewhere. But yeah, this team is super talented. Maybe not as talented as last year's Miami team, maybe on the offensive side, but the defensive side, I do think they got a whole hell of a lot better. And I think that they're going to not only challenge for the ACC championship game, I think they're going to challenge for college football playoff as well. And then, to no one's surprise, I'm sure, at number one, I have the Clemson Tigers, and I really, really wanted to have them at 12-0. It took so much for me not to have them at 12-0. I'm going to tell you which game I think that they might lose, and that's probably one of the two against LSU or South Carolina. And I do think, honestly, that they are better than LSU. I do. And I think that they're better than South Carolina. But South Carolina is just littered with talent on the offensive and defensive side, too. I think South Carolina actually has a better chance. And it would suck even more because they're bookended. So LSU is your week one. And then the last game of the season is against South Carolina. So either the undefeated hopes go away in week one, or the dreams get shattered in the last week against South Carolina. But truly, I think those are the only two games that I do see Clemson losing. They have the number one overall returning production in college football. Compare that with a transfer class that was about middle of the pack in the FBS, but it also doesn't need to be that good because of how many players they have. In recruiting, they're also, Dabo Sweeney does a fantastic job of recruiting. Cade Klubnik is a potential number one overall pick candidate. Peter Woods is also a potential number one overall candidate. Avion Terrell is a top 15 talent in this class. The wide receiving group is phenomenal. The offensive line, Blake Miller is a fantastic player who might be a first round pick as well. It's just littered with talent on both sides. I mean, truly. TJ Parker is a player that I think is a little overrated, but I still think he is a top 15 talent in this class. Just an unbelievable amount of talent. And I think Clemson not only potentially goes undefeated, but I think that they have a legitimate shot at winning the whole thing. They have a chance of marching through the college football playoff and winning the national championship. I truly think this team is that talented. I mean, it's just, there's so much NFL talent on this team. What else can I say, really? Truly. And then, of course, you have your ACC championship game that I had between the Miami Hurricane and the Clemson Tigers. And I just said, if I think the Clemson Tigers have the chance to go undefeated this year, truly, they have one of the better chances in all of college football to go undefeated. Then, of course, your 2025-26 ACC champions are the Clemson Tigers, in my opinion. Really, what else can I say? That would be a clash for the century. I think that would be a very, very entertaining game between Clemson and Miami. I would love to see that game. And as boring as that prediction might be, it's probably going to happen. I mean, really, let's be real. These two teams have far more talent, especially NFL talent, than really any team in the ACC. But that's just my opinion. But thank you guys so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed my ACC championship prediction. I haven't decided yet if the Big Ten is next or the SEC. I might save the Big Ten for last just because I do think they actually have more playoff teams than the SEC this upcoming year. So I might do the SEC next and save the Big Ten for last. But we are only 2 episodes away from being done with this series. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope I see you in the next one.